questions under Standing Order number 27, and I call on Deputy Micheál Martin.
Thank you, Alaska Ceann Comhairle. Minister, I'm sure you will accept that, I suppose, since the 1990s, this House has debated many scandals and many allegations and many issues surrounding sexual abuse, particularly of children and young people, and rape of young people, which happened across the country in different contexts, within the church, from diocese to diocese, within sport, particularly in swimming, and indeed within schools itself. And there's an ongoing inquiry, for example, into child abuse in Northern Ireland. We've had many inquiries here, and we've had many commissions of inquiry in the Republic. One just has to recall Cloyne, Ferns, Dublin, just to illustrate a number of examples. And everyone in this House was very clear in terms of condemning that abuse, and indeed in condemning anybody who would have been complicit in the cover-up of that abuse. And I'm particularly mindful of the very strong comments and strident comments of Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald back in 2009, which is a significant year now, as we know, in the context of the report of abuse in the Dublin diocese, when Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald said that anyone, including Gardaí, found to be complicit in the cover-up of child abuse must be arrested and made to face the full rigours of the law. And there's other significant comments made by the Deputy on that occasion. And I was struck that if you substituted the word Sinn Féin leadership or Sinn Féin authorities instead of the Church or Gardaí or others, I wonder would people come to the same conclusion in terms of what should happen. But it's suffice to say that allegations were ignored across the board for too long, and many people were emotionally scarred and traumatised as a result. And one of the big issues for many people in those abuse scandals was the fear of coming forward, the fear of being stigmatised, the fear above all of not being believed and being undermined by those who would have abused them. When the Maria Cahill episode occurred, we saw similar patterns emerging of attempts to undermine the credibility of the person herself, an online campaign against her, and undermining her character and so on. And this week we've had the heartbreaking account of Paddy McGahan's story on Spotlight on Tuesday night. He got courage after, and the Maria Cahill stuff was the trigger for him to go public on the issue. And I think both of their actions have encouraged others to come forward. Fundamentally, the people want justice and they want the truth. And I think it's very important that we be clear that there is a responsibility on all involved to obey the law and to respond to what the legal requirements are. And I was very struck that on FM yesterday, the leader of Sinn Féin, Deputy Adams, made an extraordinary comment to the effect that when he was asked was it not a breach of child first and breach of guidelines in terms of protecting children not to report this, and he said, first of all, in order to make a statement to the guards, someone needs to substantiate it. Now, this is fundamentally not the case. And in fact, there are two elements to this: a criminal investigation, but also there's the issue of reporting this to the HSE at the time and now TUSLA, in terms of the fundamental issue of protecting children right now in the context of those who abused. They're still at large and could, of course, abuse people within family, neighbourhood or community. Now, the fundamental point I want to put to you, Minister, that given the fact that we have faced up to this before in terms of different institutions, surely it is time, and I would ask the Government to give serious consideration to establishing a commission of inquiry into the allegations of the Spotlight programme and wider issues of how Sinn Féin, as an entity, dealt with allegations of child abuse.
Thank you.
And we know from Ferns and we know from Cloyne that where cooperation is forthcoming, these inquiries can be very expeditious, can be efficient and can get to the truth of it. Where there is cooperation and full disclosure and provision of information to such a commission of inquiry. There's different ways of doing that, and I think it's time that we had one.
I call on the Minister.
Could I thank you, Deputy Martin, and I want to agree with you on the points you've made in relation particularly to the importance of anybody who has information to bring it forward to the relevant authorities. And whether that be the Garda Síochána, TUSLA, the HSE, there is an obligation on anybody who feels that children are at risk in any way and has information to suggest that children are at risk, that they should bring that information forward. And certainly the courage of Maria Cahill and indeed of Paddy McGahan in coming forward I think inevitably will facilitate other people and give other people the courage to do so as well, and that certainly is the general experience when there are programmes like the Spotlight programme, and indeed there was a representative from the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre on radio this morning indicating that, that they have an increased number of calls. So it is vital that information is brought forward, and I would agree with you that there are questions to be answered by Sinn Féin in relation to the information that they have, and particularly in relation to information that there may be people abroad in our society, whether in this country or anywhere else, who may be a risk to children currently. And the Children First guidelines and all of the various measures that have been implemented give clear guidance as to what should be done. And I would also question Mr Adams in particular in relation to what he said, that he needed more substantial information. If you have any concern at all that children are at risk, then you should go to the Gardaí. So there are certainly questions to be answered, and there are particular questions as well around what, if these, as has been admitted, there were such internal inquiries, if I can use that nice phrase, in relation to kangaroo courts is another term that's used. If there were such practices, then are there people in Sinn Féin who have information as to who attended those courts, where they are now, what information is available in order to protect children? So I think there are a great deal of questions to be asked. I think there will be more information will come forward. Certainly the question you've raised around a commission of inquiry is one that can be considered. There is certainly, I think, an onus on Sinn Féin to give the information to the appropriate people, and that is the first obligation, and it's a very serious obligation because, rightly as you've said, and indeed many members of Sinn Féin and others in this House have frequently raised issues around child protection, and they're issues that we all take very seriously. And as I said, we have put a lot of measures in place, both this government and I will acknowledge previous governments. But we cannot, on the one hand, be concerned about child abuse in the past or in other institutions. If we have information, then we have a duty to bring it forward to the appropriate authorities.
Thank you, Minister. A supplementary question from Deputy Micheál Martin.
The only way it can come forward now is through a commission of inquiry, and it could be on a module-by-module basis. And that, in this jurisdiction, alone could be very revealing. For example, surely people would come forward in the context of a commission of inquiry and say who was involved in that kangaroo court in 2002. Who were the people who attended it and carried out the internal investigation, essentially complicit in preventing it from getting to the Gardaí. Because without doubt, and I've talked to people who are in the child law area, there's a duty defined in legislation and interpreted in case law to be proactive in their investigation of allegations of abuse. Why? To protect children from potential abuse now or into the future. Questions would have to be asked, for example, where are those alleged perpetrators now? Well, these people in 2002 exiled this person in the full knowledge that the person had committed abuse, not just to Paddy McGahan, but to others. And the bottom line is, what access did that perpetrator and others have to children in their daily lives through family or employment?
Thank you,
That's why allegations of abuse have to be investigated, to show that children are not exposed to potential abuse. So any information that's held by Sinn Féin or their associates, there's a legal obligation that knowledge or any possession of that information should be provided to TUSLA now, and indeed to the Gardaí, in order to protect children who could potentially be exposed to further abuse by an individual or individuals against whom allegations have been made. Just to make the point, last Corla, that the Commission of Inquiry gives and as we know, some of the Commission of Inquiries have held their hearings in confidential settings, for example, and then have produced comprehensive reports to shine a light on what occurred, the practices, what happened, what didn't happen, and who was complicit in the cover-up of very grave situations and very grave allegations. Because the bottom line is, in 2002, which isn't not too long ago, all of this was deliberately kept from the Gardaí and from the HSE, deliberately, premeditatively kept, and it defines any credibility that senior people within the ranks of Sinn Féin didn't know what was going on here, given the circumstances surrounding the case itself and the personalities involved.
Thank you, Deputy.
It's just not credible. But in 2009, we learned that the leader of Sinn Féin, on his own admission, knew about this and didn't refer it to the HSE at the time, and didn't refer it to the Gardaí at the time. It's as plain and simple and straightforward as that. And no satisfactory response or explanation has come from the leader of Sinn Féin. So the only other, and none will come, because we're tired of the mantra of please come forward. These people themselves know. So a statutory basis is the only way forward now, in terms of trying to get to the bottom of this and getting to truth.
Thank you. Minister, to conclude.
Well, I mean, while a Commission of Inquiry would certainly have merit, I think the most important and most urgent thing is that information that is available now is given to the authorities now. Because if children are at risk now, well then we need people who know to go forward. And I agree with you, information that was available in 2009 and before and after should be given to the appropriate authorities. And again, I find it incredible that there is not knowledge of these matters, because inevitably, from the information we have from Maria Cahill and indeed from Paddy McGahan, there was extensive practice that anybody who has knowledge of needs to bring forward now. A Commission of Inquiry clearly would take some time to set up, and it would have to have structures and so on, and it would, I'm accepting that there would be merit in that. But I would say that the urgency of the matter is that information that is available should be given now. And I would be concerned, for example, that an MP representing Northern Ireland immediately after the Spotlight programme came out and basically rubbished the programme. Now, others have since said other things, but I think there is an indication there that there is a mindset that still doesn't want to declare the information that they have. And we all have an onus, everybody in this House has an onus to ensure that whatever information is there, that it is brought forward now in order to protect children wherever they are, in whichever jurisdiction.
I now call Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald.
And it is, of course, more than a mantra to say that those with information must come forward. And I think it was most eloquently put by Paddy McGahan himself. And I want to reiterate his words, if I might, Lascian Corla. He said that nobody should be afraid. Nobody should be afraid to come forward. And I want to reiterate that. Victims of sexual abuse and rape and sexual violence are very often anxious and fearful about coming forward. It can be fear of not being accepted by their own family. It can be fear...
Please.
That's Count Court, if you don't mind.
Sorry, excuse me, this is leaders' questions. It's for leaders' questions and answers by the Minister, please.
It can be fear of social ostracisation. It can be fear for very, very many reasons. In the case of Paddy McGahan or others who say that they were abused by Republicans, so-called members of the IRA, the fear, of course, understandably, can be more profound. So I want to re-echo what Paddy has said. Nobody be afraid. The only way in which we deal with matters of abuse in our society, irrespective of who the abuser is is when people feel empowered to come forward in whatever manner is best for them. Some have come into the light of the public gaze and told their story. Paddy has done it, Maria Cahill before him. That took an awful lot of courage, and I want to acknowledge them for it. That's the first thing I wish to say. The other thing is this, is that anybody within Sinn Féin or anybody anywhere else who has information on these issues, on any child that may be in danger or at risk, has, since 2012, a positive legal obligation to bring that information forward. That is the law of the land, full stop. I want to say, as a member of Sinn Féin, on behalf of my colleagues, that we routinely bring forward information to the statutory authorities as a matter of course. I want to say also that a proposition was made by the Deputy First Minister, Martin McGuinness, to An Taoiseach last November. And the proposition is to create a process, a mechanism and a climate in which those who suffered abuse can come forward on the basis of a north-south intervention between, in other words, the government here in Dublin and the executive in the north. It took until March, in fact until the other day, for the Taoiseach to even respond or acknowledge that proposal.
Question, please,
I think it is now essential, Lasceann Corla, and I'll put my question to the Minister. I think it is now essential that we create that mechanism, that we allow people the opportunity to come forward and the assistance to access the justice system and also the supports, the very considerable supports that a survivor of sexual violence, rape or abuse requires.
Thank you.
So my question to the Minister is, does the Labour Party support that initiative? Will this government now work with the Northern Executive to create that mechanism to allow people to come forward?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, could I put it to you, Deputy MacDonald, that in the first part of your intervention you put the onus back on the victims. You put the onus on people who were abused. And in the second part of your contribution you put the onus on other authorities. And this is clearly absolutely avoiding the responsibility that you and your own party have. And it's about time you and your own party took your responsibility in all of this, rather than putting it on people who were abused and putting it on providing a smokescreen in relation to a north-south intervention, which I don't have a problem with that, but that is not the point. The point is that there is information within your own party and within others that you were associated with that needs to be brought forward. We know, for example, that Sinn Féin and the IRA conducted their own investigation into child abuse, and I understand that there are about 100 cases. Now, I think it's about time that you actually told us what people around you know, and in your role within your party, and others who have particular roles within your party and have had particular roles within your party. Because it's all very well to fire missiles around this chamber in relation to child abuse, but to avoid any responsibility on yourself and your own party.
Thank you. Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald, supplementary question.
Minister, it's not my intention to fire missiles or anything else around the chamber. I think we find ourselves faced with a number of very traumatic sets of circumstances. And bear in mind this, you see, when all the commentary is over and the political point scoring is done and the dramatic grandstanding on some people's parts is over, you still have victims left with their pain. And that's what needs to be sorted. Let me say this. Let me say this, Minister, to reassure you and your colleague. There's nothing outrageous about acknowledging the pain and suffering of victims. How that is outrageous is beyond me.
Order.
Let me say this, that I fully acknowledge and I fully understand the responsibilities that I have as an elected representative, as a citizen, as a member of Sinn Féin and as the deputy leader of this party. Fully understand it. I fully understand the onus that is on every single person. Let me speak directly to Republicans. Every last one of us, to ensure the safety of our children, to ensure that where there has been an injustice done to anybody, that is corrected for. We cannot rewrite history. That is beyond our scope.
Thank you,
what
Deputy.
we can do is do the right thing in the here and now. Another thing that we cannot do, and that we simply will not do, is carry out the functions and role of An Garda Síochána or the PSNI in the north.
Please. Order.
And Lascan Corlett,
Dowds, please.
And Lascan Corlett, before Deputy Dowds gives himself a stroke, let me remind him that I have said very clearly, and let me repeat for the record so there's no misunderstanding, that anybody with any information brings that forward. In fact, the person that you most criticise here in the course of this exchange, Deputy Gerry Adams, has brought information forward to the Gardaí. I understand that other elected members of this House have done likewise, and that is absolutely the correct thing to do. The point of Martin McGuinness's intervention was to recognise the reality for victims at the hands of so-called Republicans. In my estimation, anybody who rapes a child forfeits the right to describe themselves as a Republican. Those who have suffered in that way, and indeed others, all of those victims require that we recognise the need for them to come forward in the right atmosphere and with the right support. You accuse me of throwing up a smokescreen, or Martin McGuinness. It's not a smokescreen. It's a good proposal.
Thank you,
those that work with victims and survivors, and we've spoken to very many of them, reckon that this is a good proposal and that it could work.
Deputy, could you frame a question, please?
If it needs to be improved upon, let's do that. But can we have a commitment, Minister, from you and from government, that you will engage positively with this initiative and that we can bring it about in very, very short order?
Minister, to conclude.
Well, Deputy, first of all, anybody who saw the Spotlight programme, I think, will have got a very graphic account of the way in which kangaroo courts worked, the way in which people were made to feel afraid to come forward with information. And there's no doubt that there is a huge amount of knowledge and information around all of that activity that people who have been associated with your party have knowledge of. And that information needs to be given now so that people can be protected. And it's not enough just to throw out an empty phrase around "come forward." There is undoubtedly a huge amount of information that should be given. And I mean, I would ask you not just to ask victims to come forward, but to ask anybody who was ever involved in any of this activity to come forward and give the information. I have done that. And
Minister.
There is clearly very little evidence that that is happening. But certainly those who have had the courage to come forward about their own experience have, I believe, done a huge service and have, I hope, given courage to people. But certainly there is a lot that you can do and that your colleagues can do in relation to this issue. Now, when it comes to grandstanding, I think we've seen a very fine example of grandstanding here today. You talked about political grandstanding. We've heard a lot of eloquent, very generalised language. What we actually need is specific information that will protect children in our society.
Thank you, Minister. Now for the technical group, I call Deputy Tom Fleming.
Save Rural Ireland is a new group of stakeholders representative of 1,200 community groups across the country. They were recently formed. They have over 100,000 members currently, and they met a group of TDs and senators and yesterday expressing their views on the continuing demise of rural Ireland and the need for government policy to halt this downward slide. They are highlighting the issues currently affecting the social and economic development of rural Ireland, and they are seeking a change in government policies in several issues pertaining to rural decline. At the presentation to Oireachtas members and also to the media yesterday, they reflected on many similar issues to what Richard Cudden's documentary. There was the outstanding programme by Richard Cudden on last Monday night on RT1, and this depicted very much the plight at present of rural Ireland to survive, and the programme was titled The Battle for Rural Ireland. And it was a very well titled name to this particular programme. These people yesterday, their sense that the rural community has gone to the edge of the cliff, and they're actually gone to the stage of where they're prepared to fight and resist being given the final push and going out over the cliff and into the abyss of no return, because that is the reality that's facing our countryside at the moment. And after nearly a decade of recession policies and politics, it has taken a huge toll on these particular rural areas. And these people have identified a number of key issues which need immediate attention. And Minister, will you and your government tackle and address in the lifetime of this government that's remaining a number of these items that were brought before us yesterday? There's a need for naturally a regional spread in job creation. At the moment, 3/4 of all jobs are going to Dublin and other principal cities. And this cannot be allowed to continue, Minister.
Thank you.
You need to accelerate the rollout of broadband. I'll be very brief for the last call. Ensure the viability of our post offices and other services like retention of GP services in our rural areas, where at the moment some of the services are being discontinued due to retirements, etc. We need to get back our doctors from abroad and situated in the remote rural areas as well. And we have several cases of this at the moment. Our bus routes is very topical, and I would like to compliment you finally, Minister, in just what you've achieved yourself in government, whereby you have changed the system for enrolment to our schools. And it would mean a retention of a huge number of teachers, and also the number of additional teachers. And I will give you credit very much, and I think you have rural Ireland in your heart, Minister, and perhaps you will take these matters to Cabinet.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Sorry, could we have order, please?
Thank you very much, Deputy Fleming, and I think it's a very important issue that you've raised. And I suppose the first point I would make, that this government appointed a Minister of State with responsibility for rural affairs, Minister Anne Phelan, and she works across the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Transport and the Department of Environment, Community and Rural Affairs, and is doing a very effective job in terms of raising these issues and giving them importance in government. In fact, she attended Cabinet last week in relation to one of the issues that you're concerned about. I also just want to thank you for your compliments with regard to the schools, the issue of smaller schools. I think we have a very good programme there in terms of alleviating the situation for schools that were at risk of losing teachers, recognising in particular isolated rural schools that are 8 kilometres or more from the nearest school, and indeed engaging with the local community where numbers are dropping. So I think that's an example of an action that government has taken to address issues of serious concern in rural areas. Another area obviously is the announcement of the LEADER programme by Minister Kelly and Minister Phelan in the last few days, and that obviously is an extremely important programme for rural Ireland. Also, the Action Plan for Jobs has, particularly in the new announcements recently by Minister Bruton, has a strong regional dimension. and has strongly stressed the importance of ensuring that we have job creation in rural Ireland and in parts of the country that haven't benefited from the economic recovery that we are now seeing in the same way that, for example, the area around Dublin has. So there are examples of measures. The Department of Social Protection has ensured that rural post offices in general are used for much of their activity and their payments. And Minister White is working on the rollout of broadband, which I know is very, very important in rural areas, particularly for people who are trying to run small businesses, etc. And indeed, in my own area again of responsibility, we have finished the rollout of high-speed broadband to post-primary schools, and we're now concentrating on the rollout in full to primary schools. So there's a variety of areas that we're working on. I know you've raised some others, and I did see a media report on that group, and we'll certainly work with them and with yourselves who represent rural constituencies to ensure that we constantly keep rural Ireland as a priority focus for government.
Thank you. Deputy Tom Fleming, supplementary question.
Minister, I think that there is need for a specialised rural policy, and also a need for whereby a national policy, and this would be integrated into any future programme for government. And this has not been done up to now, we'll be honest about it. You know, it is a bit scattered and fragmented. And I also wish the very best, and I said this to your General Minister Anne Phelan last week, that she probably has one of the most responsible positions in government for a Minister of State. And I do believe there's several issues that was raised with us, and that is very much glaring out there in rural Ireland, the deficiencies that are there. And there's a need for collective responsibility in Cabinet, because some of the things I mentioned earlier pertains to various ministries. And I think that the government, as a cabinet, and the cabinet will have to wake up and work specifically and target all these areas that need to be addressed as of immediate urgency. And I would ask here that Anne Phelan would be asked to, I think she's entitled to be a city at the Cabinet table. This has been done previously with some Cabinet Minister, I can't recollect now, but I think it was the time of the Rainbow government, where a General Minister was elevated up to the Cabinet table.
Thank you, Deputy.
And I would ask that this would be done immediately for Anne Phelan. I compliment Pat Spillane for the surge of work that he has done, and now we have Edmund Harty for Dairymaster, a more successful rural company. He's present at the Cabinet table, and I think that this can be most effective if it is implemented properly, the Commission for Rural Development. And
thank you, Deputy.
Look, well, I do hope that he give the partnerships the responsibility that they certainly deserve, because they have given a huge quality delivery of service to the Leader programme in the past, and I welcome the Leader programme throughout the country at the moment being introduced, and I would hope that he would not to dilute the role of the partnerships in these matters.
Thank you, Deputy. I've called the Minister
need to
now.
give some teeth to Anne Phelan and be honest about it, and the Cedra report, look, these things need to be acted immediately.
I now call the Minister to conclude.
Well, just to say, first of all, in relation to Minister Anne Phelan, that I know that she has had one-to-one conversations with myself and all my colleagues in relation to issues around rural Ireland to make sure that we prioritise them within our own areas of responsibility. And small schools would be an example of one of the areas that I've had intensive discussions with Minister Phelan on. Just in terms of the presence at Cabinet, the current Minister of State who attends Cabinet, apart from the Chief Whip, is Minister Jed Nash, who has responsibility in the Department of Jobs. And the government took a conscious decision that jobs was a top priority for this government. And that is the background to having the Minister with responsibility for jobs at the Cabinet table, along with the Senior Minister with responsibility for jobs as well, so that we're giving that level of priority. And as you have said in your opening remarks, the whole area of job creation is absolutely crucial in rural Ireland, and we need to build on our strengths, we need to build on our agricultural strengths, we need to build on the other strengths that we have in particular parts of the country in order to provide jobs for people near their homes. And so having a jobs minister, a second jobs minister at the cabinet table, I think is very significant. But as always, whenever governments are considering for the future, there will be consideration for whoever is running government after the next election. There will be, I'm sure, consideration as to which area would be given the priority at the cabinet table.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes Leaders' Questions.